All right, so if you live out east and you're a Big 12 team, you probably want more Big 12 teams that are out east, right? West Virginia, UCF, Cincinnati, you guys? All right, let's hear from you. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I am Drake Toll, the Moadib, and that is Cole Adams, who invented YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Big 12 your first listen every single day. Cole's YouTube channel is, I think, 200 subscribers away from 69,000. I did take note of that. And he is I'm just going to like college expert in general here because you've covered so many topics on there. But first, when we talk about the future of college athletics, whether it's football or basketball, I know you're diving into March right now specifically. When you see expansion the way it is across the country, do you think this is good for the game overall before we get into the nitty gritty?
Well, is it good? No, it's not, because I don't like change with college athletics. Right. I feel like they're getting rid of the thing that makes it special. And that's all regional rivalries. Even on social media, which is something that I am constantly on, I'm noticing that fan bases are very hostile towards each other regionally. So even like you would think that when they get online, it could be all across the United States. But no, the regionality stuff, it really sticks even on social media. So it's like, I just feel like they're just taking away what makes the sport special. And it's because of the Big 12 or the Big 10 and the SEC. And then obviously the people ahead of them, which would be, ESPN and CBS, they run everything because they're the ones that are paying the bills, basically. So I just hate to see so much change, especially rapidly. I feel like that it's really turning a lot of people off. We'll see, man. I don't even know really how to predict it because it just keeps going. It's every day. So.
And by the way, for those that don't know, Cole is a Cincinnati football fan, which is just what a wild 3 years, man, to go from
no doubt. Absolutely.
The highest heights to be where Cincinnati is here with Scott Satterfield. And we'll talk about that a bit, but I do want to hone in on where you went with ESPN and CBS and Fox and NBC. Sure. And that's a large part of the content you put out is almost the downfall of ESPN, or how even from a content perspective, ESPN is not where it was. How much of what we see in expansion is like the freak out panic button mode from a network like ESPN?
Yeah, definitely. It feels like, because they're the ones that are paying the bills. So they kind of do have a lot of control over what's going on. And I feel like people just don't really realize that necessarily. And I feel like they don't really even understand what their network is anymore. And it's frustrating because we grew up with a different type of ESPN that there is now. And I just feel like they've lost a lot of that. And now they're messing with college athletics, and they're definitely not even covering college athletics the way that it really should be covered necessarily, because they focus so much on what they own. For example, like they don't cover the Big East in basketball, which was something that the Big East was founded through ESPN, basically. So it's frustrating seeing the changes that have taken place.
Especially without Mark May and Lou Holtz anchoring college football coverage.
I know. We grew up on those guys.
Cole, for you, and even a Cincinnati perspective, or someone who's out east, when it comes to football or basketball, I've talked to a couple sources out in Utah, for BYU in Utah. They would kind of love but kind of hate to see a Big 12 expansion scenario that involves a North Carolina or a Duke or an NC State, anybody out east, because now travel becomes so tough. You talk about regional matchups that mean so much.
Yeah.
For a Cincinnati fan, how enticing is it that the ACC might implode and we might get more representation on the East Coast?
See, it's tricky because I grew up on the Big East, and Cincinnati was in the Big East. So I want to see some of these regional rivalries return, like with Louisville, for example. That would be amazing. But again, how I stand as a college fan, I don't want other conferences imploding. Like I want everything to stay intact. And it is frustrating because I understand the travel aspect too. Like as a Cincinnati fan, I'm not going to many other road games, because they're just so far away. So it'd be nice to have that, but travel, it just doesn't get looked at enough, No,
it feels like that's one aspect of it. It's the athletes themselves and what they have to go through. And the idea that Northwestern and USC being a conference game will never have the luster and the lore of what even a Michigan, Ohio State is, to mention one of the biggest rivalries in college football. But from an ACC perspective, now having Cal SMU and Stanford. Let's talk hoops and the Big 12 getting Arizona and Colorado, Arizona State, Utah. Right? How does this change the basketball landscape across the country?
Well, the basketball aspect of it, I feel like I look at it completely different than the football aspect of it. Like, I'm excited to see Arizona in the Big 12. Like, that is something that excites me, but maybe I'm not excited to see Arizona in football. You know what I'm saying? Maybe it's just because Arizona is such a basketball program, but I don't know. I kind of look at it differently between sports. That's kind of why I wish that we just separated football from everything, because it would have been a lot easier to, based on how everything's changed so much. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on it, Drake? I'm curious to hear what you have to say, because you're the Big 12 guy.
I love it. This is one thing that I haven't gotten into enough. That is that if you're an everyday listener to the show out there, you've understood that I don't talk a lot of expansion when it comes to basketball. The reason being, football pays the bills. So what we know is that in these moves, that there is no really basketball consideration. And there have been talks of Brett Yormark going after Gonzaga and adding them to the Big 12 basketball only, or UConn going to the Big 12 basketball only in certain schools that would fit that bill. But we haven't seen it done just because financially it's not going to push the needle enough. So I like that you mentioned how the matchups, Arizona coming to the Big 12, we don't talk as many like Arizona, UCLA, we're not going to see on the hardwood anymore, but we don't really care. No one's really making that point across expansion. It's more so, oh, wow, how does Arizona fit into what the Big 12 does? Because they are such an elite program. I like that part. It's just the fact that the money is not going to justify the means of moving teams around if your football team sucks and doesn't bring in revenue or TV dollars. And here's something that interests me, Cole, from your perspective point of view, like at Oregon State or Washington State, or even let's talk about Boston College, talk about old basketball programs that have been good in the past. If these schools are thrown by the wayside and no longer get to compete at the top level of college basketball, is that a bad thing for the sport, or are we trimming fat?
I hate that. Okay, you said the word trimming fat, and that's what the people that are running the networks are looking like. That's how they run this, and it's so frustrating because I sincerely feel for some of these fan bases like Washington State, Oregon State, for example. They've got just a great fan base. They've got a brand new football stadium, and I hate to see that. Well, especially for the football aspect of it, but even for basketball, I mean, Washington State, they're having an amazing year, a comeback season that's just not getting talked about enough. And even Oregon State, a team that 3 years ago went to the Elite Eight. I mean, just to see them get pushed to the wayside, it's really frustrating. And I care about every fan base. Like, I'm somebody that just loves college athletics. I do have my teams that I cheer for, but overall, I want to see everybody succeed. Like, that's why I like the sport, because everything is so unique from place to place. And to see schools get pushed to the wayside, it's honestly devastating. And I feel like they're just making a lot of errors that they don't need to be making. And it's really frustrating.
Cole, coming up, let's talk even more specifically about Big 12 basketball this season and the outlook of March for this conference, and even have you pick your team. If the Big 12 is going to have a shot at winning March, who it will be. The end of the show today, we'll go more broad and give you a rundown of the 9 or 10 teams from this conference that'll be in March. All of that is coming up next on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Quickly want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the spot to go. The spot to go when you just want to make money. It's like my side income. It's like, oh, well, I can take like a Baylor money line, I can take an Iowa State money line and a Houston money line and put them together in what's called a parlay. And when that hits, I win money. FanDuel just pays me. There's an app to use. The NBA, college basketball, March Madness. There's even women's basketball and college baseball in there. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet too. So it's the best time to join. $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot. FanDuel, the official sports book partner of the NBA. All right, Cole, if you have to nail down a horse out of the Big 12 in March Madness who has the best shot to go long, even a dark horse, who is it?
Okay. When you think the Big 12, you think of the programs like Kansas. You think of Baylor.
That's my favorite okay of all time, by the way. Just that okay just sets the tone here. I love it.
Exactly. So you think of Kansas, you think of Baylor, because obviously they've got the national championship recently. or you even think of like a Houston who recently joined. But the one team, and they're really good this year, that I just feel like is getting overlooked because maybe they're just not the flashiest team of all time. It's Iowa State. It's Iowa State. And I feel like people are just not going to give them enough credit for just how good of a team they are, because they don't have the big names. They don't have the 5 stars. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I feel like they just get completely overlooked. And this season, I just feel like TJ Otzelberger has done a masterclass when it comes to defensive basketball. And they're really one of the teams I love watching the most, especially with that atmosphere out there. So when you said, who am I looking at to go on a run in March? I feel like it's them, because I'm not completely bought in on where Kansas is at the moment. I'm not completely bought in with Houston, who's been dealing with some injuries as of recently. And they're just not the biggest team. I just feel like Iowa State, I feel like they're that one team that maybe there could be some magic this year for them.
I know somebody out there is throwing things at their TV or their radio or screaming right now because you said you're not buying Kansas or Houston. We'll get into why that is later in the show. But to hone in even more specifically on Iowa State, I want to mention something that I want to play off what you said. They're not sexy. It's not a fun team to watch unless you are a college basketball sicko. Like, I love suffocating defense. Their last game, 2 games ago, I guess now, 58-45 against Oklahoma. That is not very fun for the casual viewer of college basketball, but it's electric for TJ Otzelberger and what he's trying to build. What is it analytically? Even I know you said off the air, you're a big Ken Palm guy. What is it analytically that stands out that makes you think, all right, I circled this to know they're going to make a deep run?
Well, they're the number 2 team in defensive efficiency on Ken Palm in all of college basketball. And that's not even necessarily what I love about them. I feel like when it gets to March, the court gets shortened. I mean, guys get tight. The refs are very quick to the whistle. And when it comes to a defensive team like that, they don't have to be relying completely on having a hot night. They can lock it down and they can really control the tempo of the game necessary. Like, those guards, I mean, they're amazing. Like Lipsy, obviously. So, I mean, like, that's kind of something that I've been looking at when it comes to the NCAA tournament specifically, is just how teams can play in that sort of environment, which is slow tempo, tighter whistle type of thing. So that's kind of why I feel like I'm kind of buying into them when it comes to March.
I put, Cole, my life savings on FanDuel last year on Iowa State to cover against the Pitt Panthers in round 1 of the NCAA tournament. And if you will remember, the final score of that game was 59-41. It was gross and it sucked. And Iowa State could not hit a single shot, which we all talk going into the tournament, the defense wins championships. And here, the defense was good. 59 points to holding your opponent, that's great. But only scoring 41, not good. What is it this year that you feel like is different? Do you think about that fall apart last year for a team that was still so good defensively?
Yeah, absolutely. But the reason I'm bought into this team, it's because I felt like last year was a little bit of a St. Bonaventure's Iowa State team. And I was never really I've never loved those St. Bonaventure teams because they had so many players from St. Bonaventure. And this year is just a completely different team. And I feel like they're a little bit bought in more as a group. And I just feel like I can trust them a little bit more, especially from what we've seen so far with them this season. I do understand that is absolutely a concern, because you do see defensive teams just sometimes go in there and just completely lay an egg, and then they can't do anything offensively. But I feel like this team has a little bit more of some dynamic playmakers.
Why isn't the country talking about Iowa State going into March?
They're just not sexy, man. That's all it is to it. They're just not sexy. And when it comes to the NCAA tournament, I mean, look who made the Final Four last year. I mean, you've got programs that were like nobody really predicted. Like, obviously Florida Atlantic, nobody predicted them. Miami, I mean, they weren't even one of the favorites to come out of their region. And even San Diego State, obviously. And that's a defensive kind of minded team as well. So I feel like they might be the San Diego State team of this year, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Last year's again, it was a sickos Final Four. You had to really just
it was
everything
unique
that the public loves about college basketball, and it works out because it created just pure chaos. And as we talk about what the Big 12 can do to create even further chaos, and something else you mentioned off air as a fun tease, you don't think the Big 12 is going to win March Madness this year, even though you have Iowa State going on a run. Let's talk about that next. We'll give everybody a quick little teaser on that here on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Nissan. You just drive a Nissan. I drive a Nissan. I drive a Nissan Maxima every single day, and I have for the last 5 years, and I love it. I take it across the country, and right now, you don't even have to drive a Maxima if you don't want to. You can drive a 2024 Pathfinder or Armada or a Rogue. It's perfect for city drives. 12.3-inch, which is way above average, HD touchscreen, information system, something like that. It's so intricate, I can't even explain it. 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. The Pathfinder has room for up to 8. 284 horsepower. Can't even count that high. 6,000 pounds of towing. A lot of pounds. That's 3 tons. And the Nissan Armada will change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Tow bigger and explore further in the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure at shopnissanusa.com. That is nissanusa.com. All right. It's March. This is March. I will say.
This is March.
I think my favorite tweet that I've seen of March has come from you. Which, will you tell the people what it was, please?
I'm going to assume it was, I'm deleting my dating apps to lock in on March Madness and the basketball. And it kind of took off a little bit. It was really funny. Honestly, that's how it rolls. When it gets to March, I don't really want to focus on anything else. I just want to focus on the madness,
We're just nailing March Madness. I could see myself. So I graduated college a year ago. Wow, this is a fun tangent. Just sitting in bio class in Rocks for Jocks, just quad box up, screaming for West Virginia. I'll miss that part of not being. Now I get to do it in the office, in the cubicle, which is maybe even more fun. But what do you think, Cole, about the Big 12 in March? You told me off the air you don't think the national champion lives in this conference. Why is that?
I just don't. And I hate to say that on a Big 12 podcast. I feel like, it's a great way to welcome myself to this neighborhood. But I just feel like, obviously, when it comes to March Madness, you want to see a bracket first before you make any sort of prediction.
Yeah, true.
That's the rule I live by. But when it comes to the teams in the Big 12, I'm just not necessarily imagining these teams winning a national championship. Like when it comes to looking at just the teams on paper or even the rosters lined up against some of the other conferences, like, for example, the Big East with Connecticut, obviously this year, or even Arizona or Purdue or Tennessee, a team that I really like. I'm just not buying the Big 12 having a champion this year, which is not an insult because they have 2 of the past 3 national champions. It's not an insult. It's just kind of how I'm feeling at the moment. This is based purely on vibes, but we'll see when the bracket comes out.
I love it. The comment section's going to love it. It's just how you feel. It's just, it's like today,
it's just
maybe not.
Maybe nothing's personal, strictly business, as Lee Corso says.
I think of the Houstons of the conference and even Kansas and think, the Iowa State, as we've mentioned, these teams have a legitimate shot to go to a Final Four if you get the right path. Whereas a BYU in the recent Joe Lunardi projections would play Grand Canyon in round 1, Auburn in the round of 32. And you're like, oh, well, that sucks. Like, one of the best dark horses in the conference could see an awful stretch. And you already mentioned you need to see the bracket. For me, though, Cole, I want to get your thoughts. I have transferred from we need depth to win in March to we need an elite starting 5. I think Kansas still has one of the best starting 5s in the country. What they lack is depth. I just need you to win 2 games in one weekend. If the starters play 38 minutes, that is fine. Just win the game. 8 guys can't play at the same time. Do you value depth or starting 5 more?
Oh my God, you make such a good point. I feel like bench depth might be the most overrated thing when it comes to college basketball. I feel like
in the regular season, maybe not the regular season, but in March.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. In the regular season, it is important because guys do get beat up long term. But when it comes to the NCAA tournament, I mean, like you said, you get 2 games and then you're off for a week. So it's like, you just got to kind of commit to those 2 games. And especially if you have a really like an older group, a senior led group, and you're starting 5, I feel like you can actually really survive. And I feel like, again, I just look at it from year by year. I feel like people really do overvalue the whole, well, they've got a really deep bench and they're one of the best teams in college basketball because it doesn't necessarily always correlate to being a team that can go far in the tournament. Sometimes, honestly, having like a deeper team can kind of screw up continuity, which is something that I really look up or really value when it comes. I look at continuity rating on KenPom. I feel like I value that more than like bench minutes necessarily.
Yeah. Well, like a Fairleigh Dickinson. or a St. Peter's. These are Florida Gulf Coast. They're not using 8 guys. They can't afford to. They got to put the best 5 out there to compete with big teams. And that's why they're winning. They're upsetting these massive opponents in March. That's such a big part. And I think if you're a Kansas, you then use that formula of putting the starting 5 out there and saying, look, boys, go get it done. And I think with Furphy's development, and we talk about McCullough if he's healthy, and now having Hunter Dickinson, one of the best players in all the country, why aren't you buying Kansas this month?
Well, I'm just nervous about the McCullough injury. That was something it's just got me nervous. And now he's back. So, I mean, we'll see where they go. But that was my main reason why I wasn't buying them. Because when an injury like that pops up, I mean, that's a real red flag for the rest of the season, how it plays out. But that was kind of the reason. But you are right about that. They definitely have a starting 5 that I feel like is kind of hard to match up with, especially on a one. I mean, it will probably be a 1-day prep, depending on who they draw in like the second round, for example. So it's like it'd just be a matchup nightmare, that starting 5 to score against necessarily. So, I mean, again, the McCullough injury was why I wasn't buying them, but we'll see.
Houston. We talk injuries for Houston. You're in, out, buy, sell. Where do you fit with Kelvin Sampson?
Well, I obviously love Kelvin Sampson as a coach, but Joe Tugler, he just got announced that he has a broken bone in his foot. So I feel like that's just another injury that just adds to. I mean, Houston's already dealing with injuries. They've dealt with them all year, obviously, with Terrence Anaro getting hurt. So, I mean, it's hard to necessarily hate a Kelvin Sampson team because they're just so locked in as a group. They're probably the most bought in team in college basketball because they have a very specific brand they like to play, which is get after you defensively and get after you on rebounds. But I just feel like their guards this year, they're smaller. And I feel like that really concerns me. I really love LJ Cryer. I liked him a lot at Baylor. And then Jamal Shed. I mean, you can't find like a bigger competitor than him, and especially somebody that plays with a lot of class. I really love Jamal Shed's game. So I love their guards, but I'm just concerned about their size. That's something that concerns me.
Let's go Baylor Bears, buy or sell.
I'm kind of buying them. I feel like you could probably talk a little bit more about them than me because you're a Baylor guy, but I'm buying them. I love Scott Drew as a coach, and I really like their starting 5. They're obviously really good at scoring the basketball, but I'm kind of buying them now. I feel like they're kind of starting to get their groove a little bit. What do you think?
I'm still selling. And I don't know.
Maybe it's because you're a fan. I understand that perspective because with my Dayton Flyers, for real quick, I'm starting to sell them because they're really starting to not play good basketball at the moment. And it's getting very frustrating. So.
And I think I'm higher than I was a month ago, but I think you mentioned continuity, and I can't speak on the analytics of this, but looking at them being freshman led with Jacoby Walter and Eve Meese, and then Ray J. Dennis is thrown in there with a Jalen Bridges. It's like, how well will these guys mesh in a March Madness setting? I don't know. There was so much continuity in the 21 national championship team. I don't know if you get that, but before we close this out, like a BYU, TCU, Texas Tech. I think Texas and Oklahoma are kind of the end of the line in the conference when it comes to teams that can compete in March. But that middle of the pack there, do you see anybody dangerous coming out of that group?
Oh, man, it's tough because I feel like a lot of the times these teams kind of blur together a little bit just because they all beat up on each other. And I feel like they kind of all have a lot of the same tendencies. So it's hard to like pick one out of the other. I really do like BYU, as you said, because they're just so dynamic offensively. And I really like Texas Tech, for example, because I love Grant McCasland and I kind of like the style of basketball they play, but they've just been kind of struggling a little bit lately too. So I don't know, maybe you could give me a better pull, but because they kind of all blend together right now for me. So what are you thinking?
I think BYU is the best out of the bunch. They have shown the highest highs, a couple low lows, but that's every team out of the conference in the Big 12. And so, yeah, I'd buy BYU out of that group. And really, really quickly, before I'm just going to keep you here and keep asking March Madness questions because this is March. Grand Canyon. How about University of Arkansas Little Rock or McNeese State? I mean, who's your Cinderella?
Oh boy, Cinderella. I want it to be Indiana State. Like that's who I really want it to be because Robbie Avila is awesome. I mean, everybody kind of knows about him already, but God, we got to see him on the March Madness stage. You know what I'm saying? I'm sure that you would agree with that. Or maybe McNeese State too, because Will Wade. I feel like they've been great all season long, and honestly, another one, maybe James Madison. If people remember, they beat Michigan State earlier this year, and they've just been really solid all year. So those are kind of like three that I'm kind of still tuned in on. I don't know if you have any other Cinderella candidates or if you agree with the Indiana State one, for example. But
like a Vermont or Colgate every year, it's like, oh, this is the year for Vermont. It's like, it's so
And I would agree with Colgate too. Specifically, I was looking at their bracket just today, so they'll probably win that. But I'm just not buying them this year either. So it's probably gonna be another one and done for Colgate.
Yeah, Cole. Before we get you out of here, where can folks find your work?
You can follow me on YouTube. That's where I'm mainly at Cole Adams. You just look at my name, it'll probably pop up right there. Or follow me on Twitter or X Cole Adams with 2 S's at the end. And that's basically where I'm at. So thank you for having me on, Drake. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Rock basketball. I like wearing my Darth Vader cloak.
I've got my UCLA shirt on too.
Our blue blood.
And I've got my March Madness pin, as you can see right here.
That rocks. That's Cole Adams. He is from Cole Adams, Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12. Thanks for making this your first listen every single day. Come back tomorrow. We talk more sports. This has been It Always Will Be Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.